Before stories had names and the world knew peace only in passing dreams, there was a time when cruelty was not an exception, but an instrument of power. Tonight, dear listener, we shall begin a slow and gentle walk through that age. The long, shadowed tapestry we now call the Middle Ages. But fear not, for though the tales you are about to hear are of the cruelest souls to walk among men, I shall wrap them in the softness of silence and the hush of flickering candlelight. Close your eyes and let the flicker of ancient hearths guide your breath. In every village that slept under the veil of moonlight, there lingered the fear of those who ruled not with wisdom, but with iron. These rulers, men and women alike, carried their names across parchment and whisper alike. Names that, though heavy with dread, remain etched in our chronicles, preserved like brittle leaves between the pages of time. Cruelty, you see, was rarely born out of madness alone. It was often sharpened, by need, by fear, or by the heavy burden of kingship. And so, in this first part, we shall set the stage for our slow descent into the lives of 21 such figures, each one a still pool reflecting some twisted face of human power. But before we meet them, we must understand the world they inhabited. Imagine, if you will, the Europe of the 9th century. The air carries the smell of damp soil and wood smoke. In the distance, a church bell tolls, not to signal worship, but to warn of danger. Viking sails pierce the morning fog, and peasants huddle beneath thatched roofs, whispering prayers to saints they barely understand. Law, as you know it, does not yet exist. Justice is given in blood, often without witness, and to survive is to bow, to kneel, to yield to one whose sword gleams red in the rising sun. This is the medieval world, not just one of shining knights and noble quests, but of famine, plague, and fear. It is a place where cruelty is currency, and power is preserved not by wisdom, but by terror. Our journey tonight begins not in horror, but in quiet curiosity. For we shall not judge these figures quickly. Each cruel soul we encounter lived in a world where morality was twisted like vine upon stone. They were not villains in their own eyes, only instruments of fate, of empire, of divine will. And so, let us begin our candlelit walk with a simple thought. What makes a person cruel in a time when cruelty is survival? In the pages that follow, you will meet a Norman duke who razed northern England with surgical precision, a noblewoman whose revenge knew no limits, a king who delighted in torture disguised as divine punishment, and a priest who turned sanctity into suffering. Their names, Odo, Matilda, Charles, and more, are whispered now only by those who remember. But first, a story not of a person, but of a moment. It is the winter of 1069. The snow falls thick and slow over the fields of Yorkshire. The crops have failed, not from nature, but from man. Villages lie in ruins, their people scattered like ash. This was the harrying of the north, a campaign so brutal it caused entire regions to vanish from record. The man behind it, William the Conqueror, did not flinch as he signed the orders. In his mind it was necessary, a scalpel to remove rebellion. To others, it was annihilation. Was he cruel, or was he simply a king? Such questions shall guide us as we go. With each passing part, I shall take your hand and walk you deeper into this mist. You may find your breath slowing, your eyes growing heavy. Let the cadence of these stories ease you. Though their deeds were terrible, our telling will be soft, like the turning of old pages in the quiet of night. By the end of our long walk, you may not only know the names of the cruel, but understand them, not as monsters, but as echoes of a darker time. And now, dear traveller, rest here by the fire. Part 2 awaits, should you wish to step further into the veiled past. The wind howled across the barren fields of northern England, carrying with it the scent of burning thatch and salted tears. Snowflakes swirled like ash from the heavens, settling upon the bodies of the silent dead and the footprints of those too weary to bury them. It was the winter of 1069, and the land had been marked by the iron will of one man, William, Duke of Normandy, now crowned King of England. To the victors of Hastings, he was William the Conqueror, the rightful heir to Edward's throne. But to the folk of the north, he was not a king. He was the storm, the fury, the reaper cloaked in a foreign tongue. Tonight, we linger with William, yet not in the grand halls of Westminster or the cathedrals built in his name. We meet him in a colder place, in the silence after his most terrible campaign, the harrying of the north. But first, a whisper of who he was. Born of a nobleman and a tanner's daughter, William rose from whispered scandal to the iron throne of Normandy. He learned early that mercy was not armour, and kindness could be a blade at your back. His youth was not marked by peace, but by ambushes, betrayals, and the ever-present threat of death. By the time he reached manhood, he had crushed rebellions and solidified his rule with brutal precision. He was a man tempered in fire, not cruel by sport, but by necessity, or so he believed. When he crossed the Channel in 1066, he did so, with papal blessing and righteous ambition. The Battle of Hastings was swift, yet fierce. Harold Godwinson fell beneath the Norman charge, and England bent the knee. But not all of England. The north, that wild land beyond the Humber, did not yield easily. There, Danish blood still ran in the veins of its people. They looked to York, not London, for guidance, and their loyalty was not so easily bought by a crown forged in foreign soil. So when rebellions stirred in 1068 and again in 1069, William acted not as a ruler, but as an executioner. The harrying of the north was unlike anything England had yet seen. It was not a campaign of battles, but of obliteration. Villages were burned to their roots, livestock slain, crops torched in their granaries. Salt was scattered into fields, ensuring that not even hope would grow. Whole families fled into the woods, only to freeze or starve in the bitter cold. Chroniclers of the time, even those loyal to the Norman court, wrote of the devastation with trembling ink. The monk Orderic Vitalis would later say, "So great a famine ensued that men ate the flesh of their own kind." Whether this was literal or poetic, it spoke to the depth of the suffering. William, however, did not waver. To him, it was not cruelty, but strategy. The rebellions had to end. His grip on England had to be made unshakable. He believed that mercy to traitors bred chaos, and so he chose terror as his teacher. And it worked. The North did not rise again, but neither did it recover. For generations, the scars of that winter lingered. Some villages disappeared entirely from record. In the Domesday Book, compiled some 15 years later, large swathes of Yorkshire were still marked as waste, barren, lifeless, taxed not at all. So we ask again, in the hush of night, was William the Conqueror cruel? In the soft candlelight of history, perhaps he was. He did not delight in torment, nor commit savagery for amusement, but his actions, cold, calculated, absolute, brought untold suffering to innocence. His cruelty wore the cloak of governance, but beneath it beat a heart hardened by war. In his old age, William was said to have become more reflective. He grew heavy in body and mind. A fall from his horse would ultimately kill him, and as he lay dying in Rouen, it is said that none of his sons were at his side. The peasants whose lands he had seized did not mourn. Even his funeral was marred by fire. The church caught flame during the service, as if the heavens themselves refused to bless his passing. And yet, history remembers him not only for his cruelty, but for his legacy. He reshaped England forever. He brought Norman law, language, and architecture. He centralized power, built castles, and tamed the rebellious nobility. Some would call this greatness. Others, a conquest too steeped in blood. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. As you drift now deeper into this tale, let the quiet question remain with you. When power is taken by sword, Can it ever be wielded with gentleness? Close your eyes and let the snow fall again over Yorkshire. Hear the stillness after fire. That was William's gift, and his curse. Peace bought, at the price of silence. The forest stood unnaturally still. No birdsong pierced its canopy. No breeze dared stir the branches. Only silence, thick and watchful, reigned here. And through this hush, one would see them. Pale forms against the dark bark. Hundreds, no, thousands of them, swaying gently like reeds in death's quiet wind. This was no ordinary wood. It was a monument to fear, and the man who made it was Vlad. Not the Dracula of myth, not the cloaked vampire of novels, but Vlad III of Wallachia, prince, warrior, and scourge of both his people and his enemies. Tonight, in soft words and slow breath, we shall explore his world, a world where mercy was weakness and cruelty, order. He was born in 1431 in Transylvania, the son of Vlad II Dracul, the Dragon. His title, granted by the Order of the Dragon, lent his son a name that would echo through centuries: Dracula, son of the Dragon. Vlad's childhood was a storm of betrayal and blood. At the age of 12, he and his brother were taken as hostages by the Ottoman Sultan Murad II. It was a political move, one of many, meant to secure his father's loyalty. While his brother Radu adapted, even flourishing in the opulent court of the Turks, Vlad seethed. He watched. He remembered. Years later, when he returned to Wallachia, his heart bore not just the scars of imprisonment, but the lessons of absolute power. Wallachia, nestled between the Carpathian Mountains and the Danube River, was a land of crossroads and conflict. To the south lay the Ottoman Empire. To the north, the Kingdom of Hungary. And within, a chaotic nobility divided by centuries of feuding. Vlad inherited a throne soaked in instability, and so he ruled with a singular philosophy. Fear would unify, terror would tame. He rose to power not once but 3 times, each reign bloodier than the last. But it was during his second rule, from 1456 to 1462, that the stories began. Stories that blurred the line between man and monster. Impalement, his chosen method of execution, was not unique to Vlad, but in his hands it became art and message. Victims were hoisted upon sharpened stakes, long thick poles driven through the body, carefully avoiding vital organs so the death was not swift but slow, excruciating, deliberate. He impaled thieves, he impaled traitors, he impaled entire villages that dared oppose him. And he impaled Ottomans by the thousands, leaving their bodies outside the city of Târgoviște, like a forest of warning. It is said that when Sultan Mehmed II came to invade, he found this forest of corpses and turned back. Was it true? We cannot say for certain, but what is true is that Vlad used fear as a weapon more effective than any sword. And yet, his cruelty was not without method. By the end of his reign, Wallachia, once fractured and lawless, had roads safe to travel and coin that carried value. There were no bandits in Vlad's lands, for none dared the punishment. His subjects, though terrified, found order in the shadow of his cruelty, and some even found a strange admiration. But at what cost? Let us pause for a moment here, in this hush. Imagine the smoke curling from the chimneys of a peasant hut. Inside, a mother gathers her children close, whispering prayers not of hope, but of dread, that the prince's patrols do not come that night, that her son is not mistaken for a rebel, that her daughter is not taken as a spy. This too was Vlad's legacy. He brought peace, but a peace wrapped in dread. His court was not filled with laughter, but the echoes of screams. His justice did not blind itself. It stared long and hard into the soul of every man, and if it saw weakness, it struck. Yet Vlad died as violently as he lived. In 1476, Betrayed by his own men, he was ambushed and beheaded. His head, it is said, was sent to the Sultan in Constantinople, a grim trophy to mark the end of a legend. But legends do not end so easily. Centuries later, the memory of Vlad III would inspire Bram Stoker's Count Dracula, a fictional vampire who drinks blood, sleeps in coffins, and lives forever. But the true Vlad needed no fangs. His cruelty alone was immortal. Still, as we sit now in this quiet space between story and sleep, let us wonder, was he a monster or a man forged? By monstrous times, he ruled a land ravaged by war, caught between empires, where survival required strength. Perhaps his cruelty was not madness, but mirror, reflecting the savagery of the age. So now, as the fire dies low and your breath begins to soften, remember the forest, not of trees, but of men. Remember Vlad, the prince whose silence was more terrifying than his screams. His story is done, for now, and soon another begins. In the shimmering city of Constantinople, where domes caught the light of dawn and mosaics whispered of saints and angels, there lived an empress whose hands, delicate, adorned, would one day hold not her son, but his fate. Her name was Irene, Empress of Byzantium, and hers is a story not of steel or fire, but of velvet shadows and the soft, deliberate weight of a crown claimed through a mother's cruelty. Born around the year 752, Irene was of noble lineage from Athens, a woman of grace and intellect, handpicked to be the bride of Leo IV, heir to the Byzantine throne. When Leo ascended, she became Augusta, mother to the future emperor Constantine VI. But Leo's reign was brief. His death in 780 left Irene regent, ruling on behalf of her 9-year-old son. And it was in this fragile golden window that she revealed the iron beneath her silks. In the shimmering halls of the great palace, Irene began her slow dance of control. She was deeply pious, devoted to the icons, those sacred images of Christ and saints that divided the empire. Her late husband had leaned toward iconoclasm, destroying icons in a wave of reform. Irene, however, favored their restoration. This was not mere belief. It was a vision, a weapon, a means to gather power around her. But her son, Constantine, would not remain a boy forever. As the years passed, the prince grew restless under his mother's shadow. At 19, he moved to assert his authority. The court grew divided, those loyal to the young emperor, and those who whispered in candlelit corners, still bowing to Irene. What followed was a cold war of mother against son, each maneuvering. Through layers of bureaucracy, clergy, and court, Constantine made mistakes. He alienated the military. He dismissed allies. He grew paranoid, rash, and cruel in his own right. But he was still emperor, or so he thought. And then came the spring of 797. It began with whispers. Coins no longer bore his image alone. Orders were countermanded. And finally, Irene struck. With the support of the palace guard and key factions of the court, she seized her son. He was taken not to exile, not to prison, but to a quiet chamber where a single order was given. He was to be blinded. Blinding was a Byzantine tradition, not just punishment, but erasure. In a world where rulers must be whole to reign, a blind man could not be emperor. It was as if Irene sought not only to remove him, but to unmake him. We do not know the exact manner. Some say it was done gently, a court physician carrying out the act in sterile formality. Others claim it was brutal, rushed, and left Constantine not just blind, but maimed, dying soon after. What we do know is that Irene then claimed the throne for herself. She became the first woman to rule the Byzantine Empire in her own name, Basilius, not just Basilissa, a title used by male emperors. She did not hide behind regency or modesty. She ruled outright, alone. Some celebrated her as a reformer, a champion of orthodoxy, a restorer of icons. Others could not forget the cost. a mother who had her son blinded to claim the crown. Was it ambition, faith, desperation, or something colder still? In her later years, her grip weakened. The West refused to acknowledge her as legitimate. Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans by the Pope, a title that had once been the exclusive right of Constantinople. Her own court turned on her. In 802, she was deposed and exiled to the island of Lesbos. There, stripped of power and jewels, she lived out her days in quiet obscurity. It is said she wove with her hands, the same hands that once signed her son's fate. Alone, forgotten. And so we ask, in the stillness of this tale, what becomes of power when it devours the very bond of mother and child? Irene's story is not one of rage or passion. Her cruelty was not loud. It crept softly, like ivy, wrapping around her son's throne until it was hers. And in that silence, perhaps her story is one of the most chilling. As your eyes begin to grow heavy, let this image linger. A golden throne, empty, but for the echo of footsteps and the quiet weeping of a son who never saw again. Irene ruled from that throne, but history remembers the cost. Now rest, for our journey through history's shadowed souls has many steps yet to come. The castles of the Loire Valley are quiet now. Their halls echo with the hush of centuries. But if one walks these grounds with the right silence in their step, one might feel something colder than stone. For in these lands once lived a man of impossible contradictions, noble and monstrous, devout and damned. His name was Gilles de Rais, a name once spoken with honor, a name now weighed down by darkness. Born in 1405 into one of the most powerful families in France, Gilles was destined for greatness. His family held vast estates, and from a young age, he was trained not just in sword and saddle, but in Latin, theology, and courtly manners. He was a child of privilege, wrapped in blue velvet and gold, the very image of aristocracy. When he was still a boy, he lost both his parents, and with their passing, gained a vast inheritance. His grandfather, a cunning and ruthless man, managed his fortune and arranged his marriage, ensuring that Gilles remained tightly bound to ambition. But the young noble's rise to fame came not from wealth alone. It came on the wings of war. France, at the time, was deep within the throes of the 100 Years' War. The land was fractured, the English occupying great swathes of territory, and into this chaos rode a girl, no older than 17, bearing visions and a banner. Joan of Arc Gilles rode at her side. He fought with valor at the siege of Orléans and was present at the coronation of Charles VII. For his bravery, he was made Marshal of France, one of the highest honors a soldier could receive. At that moment, he was not feared, but adored. But after Joan's capture and execution, something within Gilles began to shift. He withdrew from court. He squandered his fortune on alchemical pursuits, extravagant plays, and arcane rituals. He surrounded himself with astrologers, sorcerers, and men who whispered of forbidden arts. His castles became theatres of excess, his chapels adorned with symbols not of saints, but of darker things. And then the disappearances began, mostly peasant children, mostly boys. Their families were poor, their cries easily ignored. They vanished near his estates, some lured by promises of work or food, others simply taken. For years, the truth remained hidden. Gilles' nobility shielded him, but rumours, they drifted through the countryside like mist. It wasn't until 1440, after a dispute with a clergyman turned public, that the veil began to lift. An investigation was launched, witnesses were called, testimonies gathered. What they revealed was almost beyond belief. Children brought to the castle, taken to high towers or hidden chambers. What happened next, even in the most careful retellings, chills the breath. Some were strangled, others mutilated. Some, it was said, were made to suffer so Gilles could watch their final moments. He confessed. Before both secular and ecclesiastical courts, he admitted his crimes. Some say he repented. Some say he wept. But the enormity of what he had done could not be washed clean. He was hanged and burned in October of 1440, and thus ended the life of the man once called the Blue Baron, for his noble dress, for the banners he once carried into battle, and for the blood that in secret he spilled. Yet centuries later, some would try to rewrite his tale. They argue his confession was coerced, that the church, threatened by his wealth and heretical interests, sought to silence him, that his enemies conspired, that he was framed. But the sheer weight of testimony, the number of bodies, the grief of the villagers, the consistency of the evidence, makes such a defense a ghost's whisper against the thunder of fact. So we sit now, by this quiet fire of history, with a question burning low. How does a man go from hero to horror? Was it grief after the loss of Joan? Madness, fed by alchemy and isolation? Or was the cruelty always there, masked by nobility and war? In the soft hush of night, the story of Gilles de Rais feels less like history and more like a warning that evil does not always wear rags or fangs. Sometimes it rides in armor. Sometimes it is crowned with medals. And sometimes it carries a child in its arms. Sleep now, and let that truth pass you like a mist. The next tale awaits. In the quiet of England's wooded glades, where the leaves rustle with age-old tales, the name King John lingers like the chill of forgotten betrayal. Unlike his more famous brother, Richard the Lionheart, whose memory is wrapped in valor and crusade, John's legacy coils in whispers of cruelty, greed, and failure. Yet tonight, we shall tread slowly through his reign, not to condemn with anger, but to understand the quiet rot that can dwell within the crown itself. John was born in 1166, the youngest son of King Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine. A child of shadowed destiny, he was never expected to rule. His brothers, bold and warlike, carved their places in history early. John, meanwhile, was left with fragments, lands without names, and a title that mocked him, Lackland. But fate has a curious habit of twisting paths. By the time John was in his early 30s, his elder brothers were dead. Richard, the last obstacle, died from a wound taken during a siege in France, and so in 1199, John was crowned King of England. The crown was his, but the loyalty of men was not. Almost immediately, John revealed the nature that history would come to loathe. He was suspicious, vindictive, and often cruel in both thought and deed. While his father had ruled with a shrewd mind and Richard, with a soldier's heart, John ruled with a fist clenched tight by paranoia. His first act of cruelty came not through war, but family. Young Arthur of Brittany, the son of John's late brother Geoffrey, had a claim to the throne that many nobles favoured. In 1202, Arthur was captured during a skirmish in France. He vanished soon after. The whispers were immediate. John had murdered his nephew, perhaps with his own hands. Chroniclers claimed he had Arthur bound and thrown into the River Seine. Others said he killed him in a drunken rage. The truth was never proven, but the boy never returned, and John's name was forever stained. As his reign wore on, John's cruelty extended not only to his kin, but to his people. He taxed his barons, relentlessly, demanding money for failed military campaigns. When they resisted, he seized their lands, imprisoned their sons, and in some cases, starved them into submission. One such story, told often and quietly, was of Matilda de Braose, a noble woman whose husband had fallen from John's favour. Matilda was captured and, with her eldest son, locked in Corfe Castle. There, they were left to die of hunger. When their chamber was finally opened, both were found lifeless. It is said she had tried to feed her son her own flesh. This too was John's reign. His dealings with the church were no softer. When the Archbishop of Canterbury died, John refused the Pope's choice for successor. The result? England was placed under interdict, a spiritual lockdown. Churches closed their doors. No bells rang for the dead. No masses were held. People died unshriven, buried in silence. Still, John would not yield. Only under threat of excommunication and political disaster did he finally submit. He even went so far as to surrender England as a vassal state to the Pope, paying yearly tribute. It was a move seen by many as cowardice, selling the soul of the kingdom to save his skin. But perhaps John's most lasting legacy of cruelty was not murder, nor taxation, nor silence. It was mistrust. By 1215, his barons had had enough. They forced him to the table at Runnymede, where the Magna Carta, a document of rights and limits upon royal power, was born. John signed, but he never intended to keep it. He reneged almost, immediately, plunging the realm into civil war. He burned villages, raided lands, punished the innocent alongside the guilty. His cruelty knew no rank, only resistance. Yet fate, ever patient, had not finished with him. In 1216, while retreating from rebel forces, John attempted to cross the marshy estuary known as the Wash. His baggage train, filled with treasure, crown jewels, and relics, sank beneath the tide. It was a fitting symbol, the weight of his greed lost to the sea. He died days later, racked with dysentery, alone and unloved. The chroniclers did not weep. His barons did not mourn. The land, weary of his rule, exhaled. So why, in the hush of night, do we remember him? Perhaps because his cruelty was not one of passion, but of petty vengeance, the kind that festers in lonely hearts and fearful minds. He was not a tyrant of glory, nor a madman consumed by vision. He was, simply, a man who let his weaknesses rule him. And in that quiet truth, we find the most haunting cruelty of all, the cruelty born not of necessity or conquest, but of smallness. So as you drift now, eyes growing heavy, let this image rest beside you. A crown, half buried in mud and tide, forgotten by sea and sky alike. The last relic of a man who ruled with fear, and was remembered only in shame. Tomorrow brings another name. In the early hours of a cold Hungarian dawn, the walls of Cactus Castle held secrets. Secrets bound in whispers, candlelight, and cries that never reached the valleys below. For within those stone halls lived a noblewoman, a widow, and, if tales are true, one of the most prolific killers of her age. Her name was Elizabeth Bathory, and hers is a tale that glides gently from history into horror. Born in 1560 into the powerful Bathory family, Elizabeth was destined from birth for influence. Her relatives ruled over parts of Transylvania, Poland, and Hungary. Kings bowed to her bloodline. Her marriage to Ferenc Nadasti, a famed soldier known as the Black Knight of Hungary, only further solidified her place at the heart of the aristocracy. She lived in luxury, surrounded by tutors and attendants. She spoke multiple languages, Latin, German, Hungarian, and was known for her keen intellect. She managed vast estates while her husband campaigned, and few doubted her command. But beneath the grace and polish, something darker stirred. Thus, legends, which crept like ivy through the centuries, speak of torture, of servants beaten, burned, or frozen in winter winds. They speak of needles driven beneath fingernails, of lashes drawn from horsehair, of iron instruments fashioned not for war, but for pain. Some say it began with punishment. Others whisper of vanity, that Elizabeth feared aging and believed that the blood of young girls could preserve her youth. The most enduring tale, romanticized and retold, is of a handmaiden struck so hard that blood spattered upon the countess's skin. Seeing it, she imagined her flesh looked younger, more radiant, and so the bloodletting began. How much of this is true, we cannot say for certain, but what we do know, recorded in legal documents, witness testimonies, and the frightened letters of priests, is that girls did disappear. Peasant girls, promised work in the castle. Young noblewomen, entrusted to Elizabeth for education. One by one they vanished, or were returned in coffins. Her reign of terror went unchallenged, for years. For who would dare question a Bathory? But eventually, rumours reached the ears of King Matthias II. An investigation was ordered, and in 1610, Count Georgi Thurzo, a nobleman and cousin to the Countess by marriage, arrived at Cachtis unannounced. What he found became the substance of nightmare. Bodies, living and dead, some chained, some bloodied, some barely clinging to breath. Servants were arrested, testimonies taken. Over 300 witnesses described scenes of horror. Some accounts claimed Elizabeth had murdered over 600 girls. Others were more conservative, perhaps 80, perhaps fewer. But the weight of evidence was crushing, and yet she was never formally tried. Elizabeth Bathory's name was too noble, too entangled in the politics of the realm. To execute her would risk rebellion. To imprison her publicly would shame the entire aristocracy. So they chose a quieter punishment. In 1611, she was sealed inside a room in her castle. The windows were bricked over. A single slit allowed food to pass. She lived in darkness and silence, attended only by the echo of her deeds. 4 years later, she died, alone, unmarked, her final breath lost to the wind that coils through ruined halls. And so, the story of the Blood Countess passed into legend. Some historians believe she was a victim of conspiracy, a powerful woman whose land and wealth made her a target. Others insist the horror was real, that beneath her cultured mask lay a soul unmoored from mercy. What we do know is this: cruelty often hides behind respectability, behind fine gowns and polished words. It walks the same marble floors. It smiles, even as it wounds. In the case of Elizabeth Bathory, that cruelty was wrapped in lace and legacy. Tonight, let us not linger on the gore. Let us instead sit in the cold room where she spent her final years. Let us imagine her fingers tracing the stone wall, her thoughts echoing across memories she could no longer silence. Was she haunted? Was she remorseful? Or did she sit in the dark, still convinced that what she had done was power, not pain? As your breath deepens and your eyes grow heavy, remember the lesson whispered by her tale, that evil need not roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it wears a crown. Sleep. Now, gentle listener, there are more shadows to explore. In the heart of 15th century Castile, where incense drifted through candlelit cathedrals and the tolling of bells marked the rhythm of prayer, a quiet fear took root. It crept not from foreign lands or battlefield edges, but from within, from confessionals and courtrooms, and from a man whose devotion burned hotter than mercy. His name was Thomas de Torquemada, and his cruelty, though cloaked in cassock and cross, would ripple across centuries. Born in 1420 to a noble family with possible converso ties, those of Jewish lineage who had converted to Christianity, Thomas entered the Dominican order early in life. He was devout, austere, and fiercely devoted to the purification of Christian faith. To him, heresy was not merely error, it was disease, and he saw himself, calmly and resolutely, as the physician. His rise through the church was steady, quiet. He served as confessor to Queen Isabella I of Castile, earning her trust with his unshakable piety. When she and King Ferdinand united their crowns, their shared dream was clear: a unified Christian Spain. And in 1478, they sought the Pope's blessing to establish a new tribunal, an inquisition, not under papal control, but royal command. By 1483, Thomas de Torquemada was named the first Grand Inquisitor of Spain. He moved quickly. In cities from Seville to Zaragoza, inquisitorial courts were established. Clerics, scholars, and notaries were dispatched. Trials were held behind closed doors. Accusations, once whispered, were enough to bring imprisonment. And once accused, few escaped untouched. The targets were often conversos, Jews and Muslims who had converted, sometimes generations prior. Torquemada believed many had done so falsely, preserving old customs in secret. He feared their influence, and so he sought to root it out. The methods were precise. A person could be accused anonymously. They were given no knowledge of who had denounced them. Torture was used not as punishment, but as a path to confession, carefully regulated, yet devastating. Feet were crushed, joints dislocated, skin torn. But Torquemada, in his mind, was not cruel. He did not act from hatred, but from certainty. He believed he was saving souls, that to allow heresy to fester was to endanger all of Christendom. Mercy, to him, was eternal. Earthly suffering was but a brief pain on the path to salvation. By 1492, under his influence, the crown issued the Alhambra decree, ordering the expulsion of all unconverted Jews from Spain. An estimated 40,000 to 100,000 were forced to flee. Many were robbed, raped, or killed in their flight. Families shattered, homes abandoned. Torquemada defended the order fervently. When challenged, he held up a crucifix and said, "Judas sold Christ for 30 pieces of silver. Do not let us be sold for less." And yet, history does not forget so easily. Even in his time, there were those who whispered unease. His methods were harsh. His courts feared. The king and queen eventually sought to temper his reach, but Torquemada remained untouchable until his retirement in 1494. He died in 1498 in a monastery, quietly, his robes unsoiled by war, his hands folded in prayer. But his legacy remained ablaze. In his 15 years as Grand Inquisitor, it is estimated that thousands were tried. Over 2,000 were executed, most by burning. Countless others lived under constant fear, watching neighbors vanish, families condemned, and the Inquisition itself, once seeded by his fervor, would continue for over 3 centuries. So how do we speak of him here in the stillness of night? He did not slaughter on battlefields. He did not murder for pleasure. He believed he served righteousness, that the souls of others depended on his unflinching resolve. And that, perhaps, is the most chilling part. For when cruelty is done in the name of virtue, when pain is cloaked in salvation, it leaves wounds far deeper than the flesh. So, as we lie now in quiet contemplation, let us think not only of the screams behind thick cathedral walls, but of the silence left behind, of the libraries emptied, the songs unsung, the prayers once whispered in Hebrew or Arabic, now forever lost. Torquemada is gone, but the fear he shaped endured, not in fire, but in memory. Sleep now, with slow breath and softened thoughts. Another soul awaits our gaze. The wind rolled cold across Hadrian's wall, whistling through its ancient stones, as if whispering warnings from an older age. That barrier, built by Rome, had once marked the edge of empire, a line not of protection, but defiance. Centuries later, another would rise who believed in walls of iron and rule carved in fear. Edward Plantagenet, born in 1239, was not always destined for such a name. He was the son of Henry III, a king whose reign was marked by weakness and civil strife. From this unstable childhood, Edward drew a singular conclusion. Order must be enforced, not asked for. Authority must be absolute. He was tall for his time, nearly 6.5 feet, a stature that earned him the nickname Longshanks. But it was his ruthless resolve that truly made him loom large. Edward came of age in rebellion. He fought against barons who defied his father. He went on crusade, witnessing the cruelty of holy war firsthand. When he returned to England and became king in 1272, he brought with him a clear vision and a heavy hand. His early reign was not without merit. He reformed the law, established clearer courts, and worked to unify royal authority. But when unity failed to come peacefully, Edward used force. His eyes soon turned west, to Wales. The mountainous land had long defied English rule, governed by its own princes and traditions. Edward invaded in 1277, then again in 1282. The campaigns were relentless, crushing. Castles rose in the conquered lands, mighty, cold, symbolic. At Caernarfon, he built not only a fortress, but a legend, proclaiming his son the first Prince of Wales. The native Welsh resistance was broken. Their leader, Llywelyn ap Gruffydd, was killed in battle, his head sent to London, crowned with ivy, a mockery of his title. But Edward was not yet satisfied. His gaze turned next to Scotland. For years, the Northern Kingdom had been an uneasy neighbour, but when King Alexander III died without a male heir in 1286, and his granddaughter Margaret, the Maid of Norway, perished on her voyage to claim the throne, Scotland descended into crisis. Edward was asked to arbitrate between rival claimants. He chose John Balliol, a weak king who Edward could control. But when John resisted English interference, Edward invaded in 1296. What followed was no mere conquest. It was a campaign of humiliation. The Scots' sacred stone of Scone, their coronation relic, was seized and taken to Westminster Abbey. Their nobles were forced to swear loyalty. And when rebellion rose, Edward answered with fire. Enter William Wallace. A knight of uncertain birth, Wallace rallied his people and scored a stunning victory at Stirling Bridge. But Edward responded with brutal efficiency. In 1298, Wallace was defeated at Falkirk. He vanished into the hills, a symbol more than a commander. In 1305, he was captured. Edward made no offer of mercy. Wallace was dragged through London, stripped and tied to a wooden hurdle. He was hanged, but not to death, then disemboweled, then beheaded. His limbs were scattered to the corners of the kingdom. A message, clear and cruel. Yet the resistance did not die. Robert the Bruce, a noble with blood of both England and Scotland, rose next. In 1306, he killed his rival in a church and declared himself king. Edward, though aged and ailing, marched north once more, but he would not see Scotland again. In 1307, near the border, Edward Longshanks died, weary, sickened, but unbowed. He had ordered that his bones be carried into Scotland during the next campaign, so that even in death he might stand against rebellion. They never were. Instead, his tomb lies in Westminster Abbey, carved with the words Edwardus Primus Scotorum Malleus, Pactum Serva. Edward I, Hammer of the Scots, keep the faith. To the English, he was a bringer of order, a reformer, a king who tamed barons and built justice. To the Scots, he was the tyrant, the hammer that fell without mercy. History, in its long breath, remembers both truths. And so we ask, in the soft stillness of night, when does strength become cruelty? Is it in the seizing of a relic, the execution of a rebel, the burning of a village, or is it in the refusal to yield, even to peace? Sleep now, dear listener, with the sound of distant bagpipes fading into the hills. The next tale waits beyond the moors. The night air over Cairo was still. The stars glittered above the city like thousands of watchful eyes, their light caught in the gilded domes of mosques and palaces. Yet beneath that beauty, in a city known for its libraries and bazaars, there once ruled a caliph whose name made candles flicker and prayers grow quieter. Born in 985, Al-Hakim bi-Amr Allah ascended the throne of the Fatimid Caliphate at the age of 11. His father's death had left a realm already vast and vibrant, stretching from North Africa into the Levant, rooted in Ismaili Shia tradition. His early reign was guided by regents, cautious and scholarly. But as he came of age, the boy caliph cast aside his tutors and took the reins with startling, brutal resolve. What followed was a reign marked by contradiction. brilliance and brutality intertwined. At times, al-Hakim was a patron of learning. He founded one of the Islamic world's greatest libraries, with thousands of volumes in medicine, astronomy, law, and poetry. He ordered the construction of mosques and promoted justice, at least in his early years. But soon, a darker tide began to rise. He was known to wander the streets of Cairo by night, robed in dark blue, listening to the voices of his people, not always as protector, but as judge. Those he found guilty of slander or disobedience might disappear. His spies were everywhere, his rage unpredictable. One night he might decree lower bread prices for the poor. The next, he might execute bakers accused of short weight. Loaves, without trial. His religious policies were equally turbulent. At times he enforced extreme asceticism. Women were forbidden to leave their homes, shoes banned because they echoed vanity. Public feasting was outlawed. He ordered dogs in Cairo killed because their barking annoyed him. Vineyards were burned, music silenced. Tailors were punished for sewing garments deemed too luxurious. And then came the edicts against other faiths. Christians and Jews, once protected under Fatimid tolerance, suddenly found themselves the targets of suspicion. Churches were ordered closed, crosses removed from public view. In 1009, he ordered the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, one of Christianity's holiest sites. The act sent shockwaves through the Christian world, deepening divisions that would later erupt in the Crusades. Monasteries were razed, cemeteries desecrated, religious processions forbidden. And yet, in later years, some of these edicts were reversed, as if the caliph's mind flowed like the Nile, flooding unpredictably. Al-Hakim's behavior became more erratic. He claimed divine authority beyond the normal bounds of caliphate, not merely the commander of the faithful, but the embodiment of truth itself. In the mountains of Lebanon, a sect emerged, the Druze, who saw in him a manifestation of the divine. Though they faced persecution for their beliefs, they survived, and still revere his memory today. Back in Cairo, however, fear deepened. He exiled trusted advisors on a whim, accused governors of treason without cause. His sister, Sit al-Mulk, a wise and able woman, was sidelined, despite once serving as his regent. Those close to him vanished, often without a word. Public executions became common. The caliph, sometimes watching from behind veils, his expression unreadable. And then, one night in 1021, Al-Hakim rode out into the Muqattam hills, as he often did. But he did not return. His donkey came back alone. His robes were found, torn and bloodied, beside a pool. No body was ever recovered. Had he been assassinated? Had he staged his own disappearance? Was he murdered by enemies, or by his own kin, exhausted by his erratic tyranny? We will never know. The Druze believe he did not die, but simply vanished, entering occultation to return one day and usher in a new age. To others, he was mad. To some, a prophet. To most, a tyrant. Yet as we now sit quietly in the shadow of his memory, we must ask, where does cruelty end and delusion begin? Was Al-Hakim's brutality driven by divine obsession, by mental illness, or by the terrible isolation of absolute power? In a time when rulers claimed God as their witness, Al-Hakim went further and claimed to be God. His reign ended in silence. No final decree, no confession, no reckoning. Only the wind over the hills and the slow return of a city unsure whether to mourn or exhale. So as you drift now into sleep, think of the night-riding caliph, gliding through moonlit streets, shadow and divinity tangled in his gaze. And know this, not all cruelty shouts. Some rides quietly, just ahead of the dawn. Rome, in the final years of the 15th century, was a city of contradictions. Marble angels watched from ancient arches, while sins were confessed beneath frescoed ceilings. Gold passed hands in candlelit corridors, and beneath the crimson robes of cardinals, ambitions stirred, quiet, calculated, and deadly. It was into this world that Cesare Borgia stepped, wearing silk and a half smile, the son of a pope and the shadow of his era. Born in 1475 or 1476, Cesare was the illegitimate child of Rodrigo Borgia, a Spanish-born cardinal destined to become Pope Alexander VI. His mother was Vanozza dei Catane, a Roman noblewoman. Though born outside of wedlock, Cesare was raised in wealth and privilege, groomed first for the church, not the throne. At the age of 15, he became a bishop. By 18, an archbishop. By 19, a cardinal. His rise was rapid, unnatural, and entirely orchestrated by his father, who saw in Cesare a vessel not of piety, but of power. But Cesare was not made for cloisters. He craved command, not communion, and in 1497, when his brother Giovanni, leader of the papal armies, was found dead in the Tiber, suspicion fell heavily upon Cesare. No proof, no trial, only whispers. And Cesare, quietly, left the church behind. He became the first man in history to resign the cardinalate. A papal dispensation gave him leave, and his father, still seated on the throne of St. Peter, paved his path anew, this time with steel. As Duke of Valentinois, Cesare was given an army. Gold flowed into his hands. With the support of France and the blessing of Rome, he set out to carve his own dominion in central Italy, seizing cities, toppling nobles, and building what Machiavelli would later call a model of princely rule. But he did not rule with mercy. Cesare moved swiftly and cruelly. His enemies were not simply defeated, they were dismantled. Cities that resisted were sacked. Lords who hesitated were lured to negotiations and quietly strangled. He used fear like a brush, painting borders in blood. In the Romagna, he executed Ramiro de Orco, a brutal enforcer who had imposed Cesare's rule with an iron fist. When the people groaned beneath the weight of Ramiro's tyranny, Cesare had him killed and displayed his body in the square, cut in half. The message was clear. Cruelty may be necessary, but it must never outlive its usefulness. Cesare mastered the art of calculated terror. Poison became another of his tools. Though no confirmed records exist, many believe he used a colorless toxin, cantarella, to eliminate rivals. Banquets were his battleground. Goblets, his swords. He was handsome, charismatic, and deeply intelligent. Artists painted him. Writers feared him. Diplomats sought his favor with trembling hands. Even Machiavelli, the father of modern political thought, wrote of him with a strange admiration. In The Prince, Cesare is held up as the ideal ruler, ruthless, decisive, and effective. If only fortune had not turned against him, Machiavelli writes, he might have unified Italy. But fortune, like loyalty, is fickle. In 1503, Pope Alexander VI died, likely of malaria, though some suspected poison meant for others. Cesare, ill at the time, was too weak to secure his hold on power. The College of Cardinals elected Giuliano della Rovere, Pope Julius II, a fierce enemy of the Borgia name. Cesare's lands fell, piece by piece. His allies deserted him. He was arrested, imprisoned, and exiled. In 1507, at just 31 years of age, he died in battle in Navarre, fighting far from the land he once ruled. His body, stripped of armor, was left in a ditch. No crown, no prayer, no legacy, but fear. And yet, centuries later, we remember him. Was Cesare Borgia cruel? Yes, and with purpose. He killed not for lust, but for strategy. His cruelty was surgical, rehearsed, and always with an end in mind. But perhaps that is what makes his story so haunting. There was no madness in him, no passion, only the cold logic of power, and the quiet belief that mercy was a weakness men could not afford. So as you close your eyes tonight, imagine him for a moment, walking through the palaces of Rome, dagger hidden in sleeve, smile soft as velvet. Not all monsters roar, Some dance, and some kiss your hand before they crush. It's sleep well now, more footsteps follow. The Kremlin, in winter, gleams like a frozen crown above the heart of Moscow. Its onion domes shimmer in the pale sunlight, while beneath them lie centuries of stories, most gilded in faith, some stained in fear, and none loom larger in shadow than the reign of Ivan IV, born in 1530 to Grand Prince Vasily III, and Elena Glinskaya. Ivan was crowned at just 3 years old. His father's sudden death left a void quickly filled by power-hungry nobles, the boyars, who schemed and vied for control, while Ivan and his younger brother were left in neglect. In the cold echo of palace halls, Ivan's childhood became a crucible of silence and observation. He watched as those who claimed loyalty to his family plotted against it. He saw the servants beaten, his friends taken, his mother, possibly poisoned, die before his eyes. By the time he reached adolescence, Ivan had learned that trust was a luxury the throne could not afford. In 1547, at the age of 16, he crowned himself not merely as Grand Prince, but as Tsar, Caesar, the first Russian ruler to bear the title. It was more than a word. It was a declaration that his rule was not subject to mortal whim, but divine will. The first years of his reign were marked by ambition and reform. He reorganized the army, codified laws, built churches, and expanded territory. He married Anastasia Romanovna, a noble woman of gentle spirit, whose love seemed to anchor him. But fate once again turned its face. In 1560, Anastasia died, possibly by poison. Ivan's grief was absolute. His suspicion turned to fury. He blamed the boyars, the nobles, the court itself, and something within him broke. What followed was a reign no longer guided by governance, but by terror. In 1565, Ivan created the Oprichnina, a state within the state, loyal only to him. The Oprichniki, his black-cloaked agents, rode black horses, wielded dog-headed whips, and enforced the Tsar's will with no law but fear. They tortured, executed, and confiscated lands. Towns accused of disloyalty were reduced to ash. One of the most infamous acts came in 1570 in the once loyal city of Novgorod. Ivan, convinced the city planned to defect to the Poles, marched with his army and unleashed a massacre. Thousands were slain. Nobles, merchants, clergy, peasants. Children were thrown into freezing rivers. Monks burned alive in their own churches. For 5 days, the city knew no law, only screams. And Ivan watched, and ordered, and prayed. Some say he believed he was cleansing Russia of treachery. Others that he had grown consumed by paranoia. Likely, both were true. Yet even in his cruelty, Ivan remained devout. He fasted, confessed, wept before icons. He commissioned the building of St. Basil's Cathedral, its vibrant domes now iconic across the world. He wrote letters of philosophy and theology, corresponded with rulers across Europe. He was not mindless. He was not simple. He was complicated, broken and brilliant, vicious and visionary. But perhaps no moment captures the tragedy of Ivan, more than the day he struck his own son. It was 1581. His heir, Ivan Ivanovich, had come to him with counsel, perhaps protest. Some say it was over a pregnant daughter-in-law whom the Tsar had assaulted. Others say it was over military matters. In a fit of rage, Ivan raised his staff and struck his son in the head. The young man fell. He bled. And he died days later. Ivan, it is said, collapsed beside the body, weeping, calling his son's name again and again. The painting by Ilya Repin captures this moment. Ivan's wild eyes, his hand pressed to the lifeless boy's temple, a pool of blood beneath them. A portrait not of a tyrant triumphant, but of a father shattered. Ivan lived only a few more years. In 1584, he died playing chess, heart failing, body spent. He was buried beside Anastasia, the only soul who may have softened him. He left behind a fractured realm, a fearful court, and a dynasty soon to collapse into chaos. The time of troubles. So how do we remember him? To some, he was the founder of the Russian state, a Tsar who forged unity from disarray, expanded territory, and stood against foreign powers. To others, he was a madman, a destroyer, a paranoid tyrant, a butcher of his own blood. Perhaps both are true. In the quiet of night, let us see Ivan not as a monster, but as a man shaped by pain, twisted by loss, and consumed by the very power he sought to wield. His cruelty was not constant. It came in waves, fierce, sudden, receding, and always returning. Sleep now, gentle listener. Let the snow fall softly on the Kremlin. Let the shadows grow still. There are more footsteps yet to hear. The kingdom of Navarre, nestled between towering peaks and winding rivers, was never a mighty empire. It was a place of crossroads, a realm both coveted and ignored, caught between larger, hungrier neighbours. And yet, in the 14th century, it became a nest of vipers. And its king, Charles II, would be remembered not for victories or virtue, but for betrayal. Born in 1332 to Joan II of Navarre and Philip III of Evreux, Charles was of noble blood, a descendant of both French and Navarrese royalty. From an early age, he was ambitious, clever, and charming, a prince who knew the power of words, masks, and secrets. When he ascended the throne in 1349, he inherited a divided court, a fragile alliance with France, and the ambitions of a man who believed his crown far too small. He wanted more. Charles believed he had a rightful claim to the throne of France, a claim rooted in his Capetian lineage. But the French crown had passed to the House of Valois, and Charles, denied what he thought was his, began a long and winding dance of betrayal. He played the French and English courts like instruments, always hinting at allegiance, always holding back. At times he sided with the English during the 100 Years' War. At others, he pledged fealty to the French king, only to turn again when fortunes changed. He spoke the language of peace, but sharpened daggers in private. One of his earliest and most infamous acts came in 1354. Charles had grown close to Charles de la Cerda, the Constable of France, a favourite of King John II. But soon, jealousy flared. Whether over land, favour, or pride, Charles of Navarre ordered de la Cerda's murder. The killing was brutal, unprovoked, and delivered like a message wrapped in silk. The French court was outraged. King John II swore vengeance. Yet Charles, with honeyed words and noble birth, secured a pardon within months. The ink had barely dried on the treaty before he began plotting again. He tried to poison the French king. He forged alliances with England's Edward the Black Prince. He stirred rebellion in Paris, whispering to discontented merchants and nobles. He was, as the chronicler Jean Froissart wrote, a man full of deceit and treason, who had sworn oaths more often than any man and broken them each time. But Charles was clever, and his enemies too often underestimated him. When imprisoned by King John, he escaped. When his plots were uncovered, he blamed others. When cornered, he promised loyalty, and always found a way to slip free. His cruelty, unlike others, was not theatrical. It was insidious. He betrayed allies. He lied in sacred chambers. He fueled wars from behind the curtain, letting others bleed while he smiled from the shadows. Yet even Charles, master of manipulation, could not escape the slow tide of decline. In the final years of his life, his health failed. His body, once regal and robust, grew thin and weary. Still, his pride remained. And then, in 1387, came the final cruelty. Not one he inflicted, but one that history remembers with a shiver. Charles had fallen ill and was bedridden. His physician, seeking to revive his strength, ordered him wrapped tightly in linen soaked in brandy. a treatment not uncommon in the age. But the servant tasked with sealing the wrappings used a candle to burn the ends closed. The flame caught the linen. In seconds, Charles was ablaze. The servants fled. The fire consumed the bed, the man, the room. He burned alive, screaming, alone. Some say it was an accident, others that it was divine justice. Thus died Charles the Bad, treacherous king of a fractured land, betrayed at last by the flame he never saw coming. So how do we remember him? Not as a warrior, not as a builder, but as a warning. That power, when wielded without honor, rots the soul. That a crown taken by deceit weighs more heavily than one earned in battle. In the end, Charles ruled a kingdom he could not expand, made enemies he could not keep, and left behind a name wrapped in ash. Tonight, let us remember not his cunning, but the quiet lesson his life imparts. That those who trade in treachery may find their fate, lit by their own match. Rest now. Let the flicker of that final fire fade. Tomorrow, we walk again. The sky above Samarkand stretches wide, open, and eternal. Beneath it, once stood a throne surrounded by scholars, astronomers, and poets. But it was not always so. That city, now praised for its beauty, was first soaked in blood, and the man who ruled it, the man who raised towers of skulls from Baghdad to Delhi, was Tamerlane. Born in 1336 near Kesh, in present-day Uzbekistan, Timur was a child of the Barlas tribe, a Mongol Turkic group living under the rule of the Chagatai Khanate. From the beginning, he bore both promise and pain. A wound in youth, likely from battle or theft, left him partially crippled, unable to walk without a limp, hence the name Timur Leng, Timur the Lame. But there was nothing weak about his will. From an early age, Timur proved himself both a skilled warrior and a masterful manipulator. He allied himself with local powers, rose through ranks, and gradually seized control of Transoxiana. By 1370, he had crowned himself ruler, not Khan, for he lacked Genghisid blood, but Emir, the commander, the sword of destiny. And then the conquest began. Timur believed he was chosen, not merely to rule, but to reshape the world. Like Genghis Khan before him, he led vast armies across deserts and mountains. But unlike Genghis, who sought to govern, Timur sought glory and destruction. In 1387, he invaded Persia. Cities that resisted were sacked. At Isfahan, after an uprising, Timur ordered a massacre. The streets ran red for days. Survivors were stacked, 70,000 heads arranged in neat towers outside the city walls. He moved westward into Armenia, Georgia, and the heart of Mesopotamia. In 1401, he captured Baghdad, once the jewel of the Islamic world. There, too, he built towers of skulls. He spared scholars, poets, artisans, anyone who could enrich his capital. But for the rest, the sword. Timur spoke often of faith, claiming to wage jihad. But his blade did not hesitate against fellow Muslims, Hindus, Christians alike. All were measured by their loyalty or their usefulness. In 1398, he crossed into India. Delhi, at the time, was a city of wonder. Palaces, gardens, riches. Timur promised mercy, then unleashed horror. His army stormed the city, slaughtered tens of thousands. It is said that 100,000 captives were executed in a single day, not in fury, but in calculated fear. He did not stay. He took treasures, artisans, elephants, and left Delhi broken. In 1402, he turned west, into Anatolia, where the rising power of the Ottomans stood. At the Battle of Ankara, he defeated Sultan Bayezid I, capturing him alive. Bayezid was placed in a cage. Some say he died in humiliation, others that Timur taunted him at feasts, offering scraps through the bars. And yet, Timur was not a brute alone. He adored Samarkand, his capital. There, he built madrasas, observatories, gardens. He brought architects from Damascus, tilemakers from Delhi, calligraphers from Persia. He surrounded himself with art and intellect, even as his armies waged relentless war. He believed destruction was a means to beauty. That terror cleared the ground for greatness, and in his eyes, he was a restorer of order, a bringer of light to those who dared defy his star. But cruelty, even cloaked in philosophy, still leaves scars. By the time of his death in 1405, while marching eastward to confront the Ming dynasty of China, Timur had carved a path of devastation across half the known world. Cities lay in ruin, kingdoms shattered, millions dead or displaced. He left behind no clear successor. His empire fragmented within a generation. Only his buildings, his poems, and his fearsome memory endured. And so we ask, was Timur a savage or a visionary? Perhaps, like so many we have met, he was both. His cruelty was deliberate, a tool sharpened with purpose. He punished resistance with annihilation, rewarded loyalty with grandeur. To him, fear was not failure, it was law. But listen now to the silence left in his wake. Imagine a village once alive with bells, children, markets, now dust. Remember that every skull tower stood upon a name, a story, a heartbeat. Let that be the final echo. Tonight, let your breath slow, your eyes soften. We have walked far. The sands of Timur's empire are still warm beneath us, but we will walk further still. The salons of Brussels were filled with music and candlelight, with silken gowns and gilded mirrors. In these grand rooms walked Leopold II, tall, bearded, stately. To many in Europe, he was a refined monarch, a patron of the arts, a symbol of civility. But across the sea, in the deep heart of Africa, a different kingdom bore his name. And in that kingdom, children wept, hands were severed, and villages disappeared into the forest, swallowed by greed. Though not a medieval king in date, Leopold ruled like one, with absolute power over lands he never set foot in, over lives he never truly saw. His story begins in the late 19th century, during the Age of Empire. Europe's great powers scrambled for colonies, carving Africa into maps without regard for people, culture, or land. Leopold, whose small Belgian kingdom lacked the military might of Britain or France, devised another path. In 1885, through cunning diplomacy and false philanthropy, he gained control of a vast territory, over 2 million square kilometers, that would become the Congo Free State. But it was not free. It was not a state. It was his private property. He ruled it not as a constitutional monarch, but as a feudal lord. Its resources, people, and destiny bound to his will. The Congo was rich in ivory, but soon rubber became its gold. And for rubber, Leopold's agents built a system of terror. Villages were given quotas, impossible amounts of rubber to collect from the wild vines. If they failed, the Force Publique, his private army of African soldiers commanded by European officers, would arrive with rifles and ropes. Men were beaten, women taken as hostages, children mutilated. Hands severed as proof that bullets had not been wasted. One photograph survives in Time's trembling hand. A man named Ensala, seated before the severed foot and hand of his 5-year-old daughter, punished for failing to meet his quota. This was no anomaly, it was policy. Tens of thousands, some say millions, died under Leopold's reign. Starvation, forced labor, disease, and execution formed the pillars of his rule. The Congo's rivers, once silent, carried cries no ledger could record. And yet, in Europe, he was praised. He claimed to be bringing Christianity, civilization, and commerce. He built monuments in Brussels, named streets after virtues, hosted foreign dignitaries beneath crystal chandeliers. But truth, like a seed, finds light. Missionaries began to speak. Travelers wrote of horrors, most famously, the British consul Roger Casement and African-American journalist George Washington Williams exposed the atrocities to the world. In 1908, amid rising scandal, the Belgian parliament forced Leopold to cede control. The Congo was transferred to state rule, but by then, the damage was done. Leopold died the following year in 1909. As his funeral procession passed, crowds jeered. Flowers were thrown, not in mourning, but in mockery. His wealth, built upon suffering, adorned the palaces of Europe, but his name, once whispered in admiration, grew heavier with every truth unearthed. So why, in a journey through medieval cruelty, do we pause here? Because Leopold, though clothed in modern dress, ruled with the soul of a medieval tyrant. His Congo was no different than a fiefdom, his justice no less brutal than a dungeon's chain, and his story reminds us that cruelty evolves. It learns the language of the day, it hides behind new titles, it wears civility like armor, but it remains. Tonight, as we return to older ages in the tales to come, let us carry this quiet truth with us, that cruelty is not bound by time. It walks beside power, it whispers in silence, and, sometimes, it wears gloves. Let your breath soften now. The Congo sleeps. The names of the lost, though unrecorded, echo still in the leaves. Tomorrow, we return to older roads. The Danube shimmered beneath the setting sun, its wide, winding flow a mirror to the kingdoms it divided. To the north, Transylvania's thick forests guarded ancient paths. To the south, Ottoman banners fluttered like ominous leaves. And between them, Wallachia, a realm of crossroads and conflict, where loyalty was currency and betrayal. An art. Vladislaus II, sometimes known as Vlad the Monk, or simply Vladislaus Dan, was not born to infamy. A cousin of the famed Vlad III Dracula, he came from the same noble blood, the House of Draculesht, whose members often feuded like wolves over scraps of throne and power. He rose to prominence in the mid-15th century, when the throne of Wallachia was as much a trap as a title. Princes came and went in a blur of war, diplomacy, and execution. And when Vlad III was captured by the Hungarian king Matthias Corvinus in 1462, the throne lay empty. Into this void stepped Vladislaus. At first, his rule was seen as a reprieve, a calmer hand after the storm of Vlad the Impaler's reign. But calm, in these lands, was often the surface above deeper currents. Vladislaus II owed his throne to the Ottomans. In return, he paid tribute, coin, grain, and silence, a peace bought with bowed heads. But his loyalty shifted with the wind. At times he turned to Hungary, swearing allegiance to Corvinus. At others, he embraced Ottoman envoys, trading, hostages and promises. To some, he was a diplomat. To others, a coward. But the truest word was betrayer. One of his earliest treacheries came not by blade, but by ink. During Vlad III's imprisonment, Vladislaus promised to maintain neutrality, to preserve Wallachia's independence from both Ottoman and Hungarian claims. But he did not. He signed secret treaties, sent word to Istanbul and Buda alike. And, when Vlad III was finally released and sought to reclaim his throne, Vladislaus refused all calls to step aside. Instead, he fortified his court, raised troops, and readied for civil war. The people of Wallachia were caught in the middle. Again, peasants fled. Towns changed banners by the week. Monasteries were burned, not by foreign hands, but by their own kin. For nearly a decade, the land knew only shifting loyalties and shallow graves. It is said that in 1476, when Vlad III returned with Hungarian support to reclaim his rule, Vladislaus met him not with honor, but with ambush. The final battle between the two cousins took place near Bucharest. Vlad III, despite his ferocity, was outnumbered. He was killed in the field, some say by Ottoman assassins. Others claim it was Vladislaus's own blade that struck the final blow. His head was severed and sent to Constantinople, where it was displayed on a spike as proof of Ottoman supremacy. Vladislaus II, victorious, returned to the throne, but his reign, though lengthened, was never secure. He was haunted by what he had done. The land, weary of war, no longer sang his name. He was seen not as a hero, but as a shadow, the man who ruled because others had fallen. And cruelty, for Vladislaus, was not a spectacle. It was a tool. He exiled nobles who questioned him. He executed former allies under charges of treason. He raised taxes, demanded tithes, and stripped churches of coin. Those who had once supported him found themselves cast aside, forgotten, or worse. In the end, he died not in battle, but in obscurity, around 1481. No great monument marked his grave. No poet honored his memory. He had won his throne, but lost his soul. So why do we remember him? Because betrayal leaves longer scars than swords. Because cruelty done in silence, without blood, without fire, can still break kingdoms. And because sometimes the most dangerous men are not those who rage, but those who whisper, promise, and disappear. As you rest now, imagine the Danube. Again, flowing as it always has, past lands once ruled by cousins who shared a name, but not a heart. One ruled by terror, the other by treachery. Both left shadows. Sleep now, for the journey continues. In the deep quiet of the Loire Valley, among the ivy-covered walls of Plessis-les-Tours, a figure once walked. Hunched, wiry, clad in plain garments, always watching. He wore no crown in court. He shunned pageantry. He prayed obsessively, whispered to saints, and filled his chambers with cages and secrets. This was Louis IV of France. Born in 1423, the son of Charles VII, Louis grew up in a kingdom still recovering from the 100 Years' War. France was fragmented, weakened, by English invasion and internal division. Nobles held near sovereign power. The crown was a symbol, not a force. But Louis watched. He was not handsome. He lacked the charm of a hero. Yet beneath his narrow eyes burned a cold intelligence. He distrusted most, confided in few, and never forgot a slight. He believed that the age of swordplay was fading, and that power belonged to the patient. When he became king in 1461, he did not stage grand processions or noble feasts. He set about centralizing authority, quietly, methodically, and often cruelly. Louis's enemies were many. Chief among them was Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, a prince more like a king, whose lands rivaled France in wealth and power. Charles favored gallant war, shining armor, and heroic posturing. Louis, in contrast, preferred informants and ink. Their rivalry shaped a generation. Louis bribed Charles's allies, spread rumors, funded rebellions behind his back. He would sign treaties with one hand and order sabotage with the other. But his cruelty was not merely political, it was personal. He used fear as a constant thread, not in open executions, but in confinement, manipulation, and betrayal. His network of informants was vast. No conversation in France felt truly private. Nobles were imprisoned in iron cages, sometimes custom-built so that they could neither stand nor lie down. One such contraption, the fillets, was allegedly reserved for those who had once mocked him in youth. Louis believed that terror did not require blood, only uncertainty. He was deeply superstitious. He surrounded himself with astrologers, relics, and amulets. He wore coarse wool and prayed fervently, yet his mind never ceased weaving plots. He spoke to saints and spies alike, treating both as tools of the state. He struck hardest when his enemies believed him weakest. In 1477, Charles the Bold died in battle. His duchy crumbled. Louis moved swiftly, seizing key territories, absorbing Burgundy into the royal domain. What had seemed impossible, the taming of France's greatest rival, was achieved without a grand battle, only cunning. But power did not soothe Louis. As he aged, his fears grew. He withdrew from court, ruling from behind locked doors, communicating through coded letters. He distrusted his own family, his advisors, even his doctors. Some say he walked the halls of Plessis with a cross in one hand and a dagger in the other. He died in 1483, plagued by illness and paranoia, his body broken but his grasp unrelenting. He had turned France from a fractured land of feuding lords into a stronger, more centralized kingdom. He laid the groundwork for absolute monarchy, and he did it not with swords, but with webs. So we ask now, in the hush of midnight, what is cruelty? Is it the swing of an axe, the scream of a burning city, or is it the quiet pressure of fear, the whisper that someone is always watching, the knowledge that mercy is a mask, not a promise? Louis XV ruled with that whisper. He made himself smaller than a king and greater than one. Tonight, let us remember the man who prayed like a monk and plotted like a spider. Rest now, for our descent into history's shadows continues. In the year 1474, upon the death of her half-brother Henry IV, Isabella of Castile claimed the throne. She was 23, sharp-eyed and devout, already married to Ferdinand of Aragon, a union that would reshape not just Spain, but the world. Together, they would be known as the Catholic monarchs, rulers who brought unity, strength, and a merciless vision of faith. Isabella believed in order, in divine right, and in the purity of her kingdom's soul. And when she looked upon her realm, fractured by rival nobles, linguistic divisions, and religious plurality, she did not see richness. She saw danger. Under Muslim rule, Spain had long been a mosaic of tolerance, especially in cities like Toledo and Cordoba, where Jews, Christians, and Muslims coexisted, traded, and studied together. But with Christian reconquest nearing its completion, Isabella sought not only territorial unification, but spiritual uniformity. Her most enduring and most chilling tool was the Inquisition. Though initiated by papal permission, it was Isabella and Ferdinand who molded the Spanish Inquisition into a machine of fear. Its purpose, to investigate heresy, especially among conversos, Jews and Muslims who had converted to Christianity but were suspected of secretly practicing their old faiths. The Inquisition operated in shadows. Accusations were anonymous, torture sanctioned. Trials were rarely fair. Those found guilty, even on the flimsiest of suspicion, were fined, exiled, or publicly burned in autos de fe, ritualistic acts of penance and spectacle. Isabella did not flinch. She saw it as cleansing, a painful but holy surgery. In her court, faith was not a matter of conscience, but of state. And in 1492, the same year Christopher Columbus set sail under her banner, Isabella signed another, more terrible decree, the Alhambra Edict. It ordered all Jews in Castile and Aragon to convert or leave. They had 4 months. Spain lost scholars, merchants, doctors, and artisans. Entire communities vanished. Synagogues were abandoned. Families fled to Portugal, North Africa, the Ottoman Empire, carrying little but memory. Many converted, some out of faith, others in fear, but suspicion followed them nonetheless. The pain of that edict echoed not for years, but for centuries. And yet, Isabella did not see herself as cruel. She believed she was saving souls. That unity in faith would bring strength to the realm, that God smiled upon a land purified in suffering. Her defenders point to her intelligence, her reforms, her patronage of learning. She was indeed a capable ruler. She curbed noble excess, funded education, and strengthened royal authority. But her reign was marked by a singular, unyielding vision. One crown, one language, one church. The human cost of that vision was vast, and, for all its grandeur, it was built upon silence. The silence of those no longer allowed to speak their tongue, or pray in their way, or simply remain. In her later years, Isabella grew frail, but remained resolute. She died in 1504, mourned by many, praised as a queen of virtue. Yet beneath the gilded tombs of the royal chapel in Granada, beneath the marble and incense, lie the bones of a woman whose cruelty wore the veil of sanctity. So we ask now, in this gentle darkness between waking and sleep, is it crueler to strike in rage or in righteousness? Isabella never lifted a sword, yet the edicts she signed shaped exile, torment, and death. Let us remember that cruelty sometimes arrives not in fury, but in conviction. Rest now, gentle listener, for we are nearing the final chapters. In the great city of Constantinople, where the sea meets the walls and the Hagia Sophia casts its long shadow across cobbled streets, Basil Thar ruled not from beauty, but from steel. He was not a man of courtly flair. He wore plain robes, ate simply, trusted few. While others surrounded themselves with eunuchs and orators, Basil preferred maps, swords, and silence. Born in 958, he ascended the throne in name at the age of 18, though true power was slow to come. The empire was fraying, torn by rebellious generals, foreign threats, and the corruption of its court. But Basil, patient and iron-hearted, would forge it whole again. His early years were tested by betrayal. The general Bardas Skleros led a rebellion. Then Bardas Phocas. Basil crushed them both. Each time he learned how to bribe, how to divide, how to strike when the blade could cut deepest. Yet no enemy drew his fury more than the Bulgars. The Bulgarian Empire, under Tsar Samuel, had grown strong. Its armies raided imperial lands. Its soldiers burned monasteries and cities. Samuel himself was brilliant, elusive in battle, stubborn in diplomacy. For years the war dragged on, a slow grinding of men and will. But Basil never relented. He reorganized the army, built new roads, ensured supplies flowed. And in 1014, near the mountain passes of Clydion, he struck. It was a trap well set. Samuel's army, confident and vast, was caught in a narrow defile. Basil's forces blocked the exit, encircled the heights, and rained down death. The Bulgars were slaughtered by the thousands. Those who surrendered fared little better. Here, Basil's name was carved in blood. He ordered the blinding of 15,000 tyrants, Bulgarian prisoners, every man left sightless, save for one in every 100 who was left with a single eye, to lead the rest home. Imagine the line, stretching across hills and rivers, a procession of darkness, groaning and weeping, guided by stumbling hands. When Tsar Samuel saw them return, he collapsed. Some say he died 2 days later of shock and grief, and Basil was henceforth known as the Bulgaroktonos, the slayer of Bulgars. It was a title he bore not with regret, but with grim pride. But was he cruel, or simply relentless? Basil waged war not for conquest, but for order. He believed in the unity of the Roman world. One emperor, one law, one peace. In the east, he crushed rebels. In the west, he reclaimed lands lost to Norman and Arab. He was incorruptible, rare among rulers. He amassed wealth for the state, not himself. He died with modest personal means, and his will asked to be buried not in grand tombs, but beside his soldiers, near the walls he had spent a lifetime defending. Under Basil, the empire reached its greatest territorial height in centuries, but it came at a cost. His rule was long, nearly 50 years, and by the time he died in 1025, few dared challenge him. But his successors lacked his iron. The strength he forged faded quickly as softer hands inherited his throne. So what do we make of Basil turned? To his people, he was a guardian, feared, respected, obeyed. To his enemies, he was a name that chilled the spine. But cruelty does not always rage. Sometimes it marches in silence. Sometimes it walks with purpose, convinced of its righteousness. Basil blinded 15,000 men, not in madness, but in strategy, to break the spine of a kingdom. It worked, and for that, history remembers him as both emperor and executioner. Tonight, let your thoughts linger, not on the battlefield, but on the march. Those thousands of men, robbed of sight, led through mountain paths by trembling hands. Not a scream, just silence and steps. Rest now. Only a few remain in our journey. The 14th century in Italy was an age of shifting loyalties and endless war. The Black Death had swept through the land. The papacy had moved to Avignon. And the city-states, Florence, Milan, Venice, Pisa, danced a dangerous dance of alliances and betrayals. In this turbulent world, the most feared men were not kings, but condottieri, commanders of mercenary armies, men of no fixed homeland, who sold their swords to the highest bidder. Among them, one name rose above the rest: Giovanni Acuto, as the Italians called him, John Hawkwood. He was born in Essex, England, around 1320. The son of a tanner, he fought in the 100 Years' War under Edward III, where he learned the brutal rhythms of medieval battle, how to raid, how to flank, how to pillage. But it was in Italy that he found his fortune and his infamy. By the 1360s, he had joined the White Company, a feared band of soldiers for hire, known for discipline, efficiency, and ruthlessness. They marched in gleaming armor, their banners white, their actions anything but. Hawkwood became their leader. He sold his services to city after city, to Florence against Milan, to Milan against Florence, even to the Papal States. He would fight for the Pope 1 month and sack papal lands the next. Yet among his many campaigns, one act stands as the darkest: the sack of Cesena in 1377. At the time, Pope Gregory XV had returned the papacy to Rome and was determined to reassert control over rebellious Italian cities. Cesena, in the Romagna region, was one such city. The Pope's legate, the infamous Cardinal Robert of Geneva, later to become anti-Pope Clement VII, hired Hawkwood to punish the city. Cesena had briefly rebelled. The townspeople had attacked papal troops. But by the time Hawkwood arrived, the rebellion had quieted. Still, vengeance was ordered. Under pretense of peace, Hawkwood and his men entered the city. They were welcomed, fed, housed, and then the massacre began. For 3 days, Hawkwood's mercenaries slaughtered men, women, children. None were spared. Churches became abattoirs. Homes were set ablaze. Those who fled were cut down in the streets. Estimates vary, but thousands died. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Cesena never recovered. And though the massacre was ordered by the church's envoy, it was Hawkwood's hand that carried it out, coldly, professionally, without remorse. Yet even after this horror, Hawkwood's reputation grew. Florence, impressed by his military prowess, hired him again. They gave him land, wealth, and even arranged a marriage to a noblewoman. He became a citizen, a patron, a respected man. When he died in 1394, the Florentines buried him with honors in the Duomo. His epitaph praised him not as a butcher, but as a knight. So how do we reconcile the man with the memory? John Hawkwood was not cruel for cruelty's sake. He killed not from rage, but for coin. His victims were not enemies, they were targets. His wars had no ideology, no justice, only contracts. And that, perhaps, is the deepest cruelty of all. In a world ruled by shifting gold, Hawkwood was a perfect reflection. A man who cared not who he fought for, only that he was paid. The people of Cesena remembered him not as a knight, but as a shadow, the foreigner who came with smiles and left behind silence. So tonight, let us pause at the gates of Cesena. Let us imagine the streets, silent and broken, the church bells stilled, the doors burned black. And let us remember that cruelty need not come in thunder. Sometimes it wears polished armor, speaks in measured tones, and walks away richer. Rest now, gentle listener, only 2 tales remain. Joanna was born in 1326 into the royal house of Anjou, destined for a crown before she could walk. From her earliest days, she was surrounded by intrigue. The Neapolitan court was lavish, yes, but also venomous. Gossip passed through silk, curtains. Alliances were forged in ballrooms and broken in poison. At the age of 7, Joanna was betrothed to her cousin, Andrew of Hungary. The match was political, meant to link Naples to the powerful Hungarian crown. They were raised together, married at age 16, and crowned co-rulers soon after. But love, in those corridors, was a distant idea. Andrew was brash and foreign. The Neapolitan nobility despised him. Joanna, graceful and clever, held the hearts of her people. She was crowned queen alone, her name spoken first in all ceremonies. Andrew resented this. He demanded power equal to hers. Letters from Hungary urged him to seize control. Rumours swirled that he would dismiss Neapolitan advisors and impose his own rule. And then, one night in 1345, the palace echoed with screams. Andrew had been lured from his chambers under pretense of a hunting expedition. In the darkness, he was seized, bound, and strangled. Some say he was thrown from a balcony while still alive. Others, that his cries were silenced with a final blow. The murder shocked Europe. Joanna was immediately suspected. She had motive, opportunity, and, it was whispered, the support of her court. She denied involvement. A papal investigation absolved her. But the shadow remained. Hungary was outraged. Andrew's brother, King Louis III, invaded Naples in vengeance. Joanna fled to Provence, where she married again and again. In her lifetime, she would wed 4 times. Each union brought political advantage and greater suspicion. Her reign was marked by ceaseless struggle. She navigated wars, papal feuds, and revolts. At one point, 2 rival popes, Urban VI and Clement VII, declared themselves true successors of Peter. Joanna supported Clement, the Avignon Pope. For this, Urban excommunicated her and declared her deposed. And once again, betrayal came. In 1381, her own adopted heir, Charles of Durazzo, marched on Naples with papal blessing. Joanna was captured, imprisoned in a tower in Muro Lucano. There, at age 55, the serpent met the blade. She was smothered or strangled, the details lost to time. Her body buried hastily, her kingdom seized. So was Joanna a cruel queen. She ruled in an age where mercy was weakness. She maneuvered through a world where men betrayed her, and she, perhaps, struck first. She protected her throne with daggers, words, and glances. Her hands may not have spilled blood, but her decisions rippled with consequence. She danced through assassinations, invasions, and lies. And yet, she never stopped ruling. She rebuilt Naples after earthquakes, patronized scholars, protected Jews. In her domain when others expelled them, she was both serpent and shepherd. Even now, historians remain divided. Was she a murderess, or a scapegoat, a tyrant, or simply a survivor? Perhaps she was all of these, perhaps none. But in the hush of this night, let us see Joanna not through the eyes of her enemies, but as a woman born into a lion's den, who learned to whisper like one of them and to strike. As you close your eyes, imagine her seated in her high-walled garden, surrounded by roses, a falcon on her wrist, and danger at her feet. She ruled with poise, and perhaps with poison. Sleep now. One final story remains. The night has deepened, and in its quiet folds, we've wandered far, from the icy hills of England to the golden domes of Byzantium, from the fires of India to the hush of Florentine chambers. We have met kings, queens, popes, generals, and yet, at every turn, one question followed us like a shadow. What is cruelty? Does it ride in fury, like Tamerlane, or creep through whispers, like Louis XV? Does it strike with fire and stake, like Vlad the Impaler, or speak softly, in righteous tones, like Isabella of Castile? We have seen cruelty wear many faces, male and female, royal and common, sacred and secular. Some killed with hands, others with pens, some ruled with terror, others with indifference, and some perhaps believed they were saving the world, even as they broke it. It is tempting to see these figures as monsters, to lock them in the dungeons of memory, far from the world we know. But history does not afford such comfort, because each of them, for all their dread, were human. They woke with burdens. They feared betrayal. They craved love, respect, control. They were not born cruel, but somewhere, in the corridors of power, in the heat of conflict or the ache of loss, cruelty became their tool. And that is the most haunting truth of all. Cruelty, in history, is rarely loud. More often, it is quiet. A delayed letter, a forgotten plea, a signature inked in haste, a decision made not in wrath, but in cold logic. Each of these shaped empires. Each left scars that outlasted stone. But cruelty is not the whole story. In the margins of these tales, there were also the brave, the just, the kind. For every Hawkwood, a nurse who wept at Cesena. For every Torquemada, a soul who hid the condemned. For every tyrant, a witness. It is their silence, the silence of those who endured, that must not be forgotten. Let us pause now, not to judge, but to listen. To the girl who vanished at Kachtich, to the child blinded in Bulgaria, to the merchant exiled from Castile, to the soldier buried beneath Samarkand's towers, to the monk who vanished in the fog of France. They did not write history, but they lived it. And it is through them that we understand the cost of power unrestrained. So what have we learned? That cruelty is never confined to time. It travels, it evolves, it learns new words. And yet, so too does remembrance. To remember these stories is to honor not the cruel, but the truth, not to glorify their deeds, but to ensure they are never repeated in silence. And you, dear listener, have walked this long road with care. You have not turned away. You have not rushed past. You have listened slowly. And now, as the final ember glows low, as the last voice fades into the hush, you may rest, for we have come full circle, not to fear, but to understanding. History is not a sword. It is a mirror, and cruelty, when seen in its full shape, loses its strength. So sleep now, let the candles burn low, and if the wind carries at sea, name from long ago, do not be afraid. You have heard their stories, you carry their memory, and that, in the end, is the gentlest power of all.